family pretty much thinks I worship the devil now.
When I left the faith, I lost my family, my friends, and my whole community. Though some things have gotten better, it still hurts at times.
We took road trips to see evangelists. That was what my family did. We went camping and we went to see evangelists. We didn't go to like Disney. We didn't do vacations. We really had our trips surrounded in the Christian faith.
I grew up Catholic, and my mother was very strict on that and very much taught me to sort of cling to my faith in times of uncertainty. And it helped me to get through a lot of hard times in my life.
Welcome to Forsaking Faith, where we tackle these and other thoughts through discussion and contemplation.
This is Heather Bailey and Christine Goodrich. Our podcast explores the journey from fundamentalist Christianity to non-belief by examining the deep and nuanced effects of deconversion.
While some ex-Christians focus on the negative aspects of their past, we want to emphasize how leaving Christianity is a complicated process that brings both pain and joy. It is both loss and liberation. While we lose structure, community, and stability, we gain empowerment and agency.
We want to create a space for thoughtful discussion in this spirit, and we invite you all to join us.
In this episode, we talk about how our immediate families have influenced our deconversion or how we've reacted to them throughout our deconversion. And Heather begins the episode by talking about how her parents' relationship has affected her deconversion specifically because she didn't agree with their model. She also talks about how she came out and as a non-Christian to each of her family members separately. Most interesting, her coming out to her deconverted sister because her sister had deconverted before her. And so I think that interaction was a cool point. We both kind of discuss that we needed to accept that our relationships with our family wasn't going to be strong because of this mismatch in faith.
Christine talks about how her mom, because her mom wanted to be an evangelist, that her life was really submersed in the charismatic evangelical culture. So she talks about, one of the things I think is really interesting is that she talks quite a bit about the things that were positive about that when she was a child, and how she was part of the stable Christian community. And then she talks about how, for some complicated reasons that she gets into a little bit in this podcast, she discusses how she grew more distant from her family during her adolescence. And so she adapted her Christian friends as her family, and they really fulfilled that role for her. So then she talks about how it became complicated when she deconverted, and how she negotiated those friendships, and also how she got back in touch and back in communication with her family. And in an interesting way, now in her own approach to understanding her family, has adopted her parents' model of what a partnership looks like. And so Christine talks about that and about how in her own romantic relationship and as a mom, how her parents' relationship has influenced her in that way.
So here Heather is with her I don't think I need to introduce it. I'll just stop common ground.
So I'd like to start this podcast by talking about a term that Christine and I both use in our descriptions of what our family relationships have been like, since our deconversion, and that's the term coming out. And so I want to explain why I use that term. Coming out is obviously a term that's used by the queer community to describe the experience of letting family members and friends know that they are not straight. And I feel like I can appropriate and use this term to describe my experience of talking to my family about my deconversion, because I am also bisexual. So I can really understand that experience, because I am not out to quite a few of my family members in both senses of the word. And we will, Christine and I will certainly talk about this more on a future podcast. We're going to have a whole podcast on sexual orientation. But so that's all I'll say about it right now. I did want to make sure I was clear about why I was using that term. So when I think about my family, that is one of the biggest challenges for me, is that I am not out to, again, most of my close family members, many of whom don't even know I'm doing this podcast. For this very reason. And I, especially when it comes to my parents. So my parents do not know that I am not a Christian. And I think that they suspect, because they know that I don't attend a church regularly, but I think that they're probably choosing to be in, blissful denial to some extent.
They also might think, they might think that you have a relationship with God and it's not total deconversion.
Yes, exactly. That could be the case as well. And so it's an unspoken thing between us. And I have to admit, I am too scared to actually come out to them, because I think it would be really devastating for them and stressful and hurtful, and they and very concerning, because again, these are, my parents genuinely believe that hell is a real place, therefore genuinely believe that I'm destined to go to hell. So it's a very stressful thing, and I just don't want to put that on them, and so I have not brought it up. And because of my Christian background, I can perform Christianity. It's very easy for me to fall back into using the lingo associated with Christianity. I mean, I could right now convince anyone that I encountered that I was a Christian fundamentalist if I wanted to, because
right.
I know all the language. I know the Bible verses. I know the terminology. I know the worship songs. I know how to raise my hand, in worship. I mean, all these things. So when I'm around my parents, that's just what I do. I will use that kind of terminology if it comes up in conversation, and I'll go to church with them sometimes, and again, just kind of go along with it. And my parents so we don't talk explicitly about relationships with God for the most part. But my parents will talk about praying for me quite often. If I call and I'm upset about something that's happened that's been upsetting, or I tell them I've been sick or something, they'll tell me that they're going to pray for me. And so that's something that still happens. And so that's where I'm at with my parents. And I'll describe my parents' personalities a little bit too, because that also relates to this sort of silence, sort of the elephant in the room, where we just don't talk about our walks with God and don't talk about my walk or lack of walk with God. My parents are both very passive people in different ways. So my dad is very calm, but very passive and doesn't talk about his feelings or emotions very much. He and I can have some political conversations. So during this election year, we don't agree on politics, as many of our listeners can probably imagine, given what I've just told you about my parents. We have very different political views, but my dad and I can get to that point and have had some, fairly interesting conversations surrounding politics. But my mom and I have a more complicated relationship because of other factors. But my mom is also very passive, and she's more in the passive aggressive side. And I also want to say I'm really not. My intention in this is not for this to turn into a parent roast. I'm just trying to be honest. I mean, parent relationships are complicated, so this is just a reality for me. So the passiveness and the passive aggression is difficult, and my mom, unfortunately, gets very emotionally charged if there's any discussion about something that makes her slightly uncomfortable. So unfortunately, that means that we can't really talk about much at all. We can't even talk about politics. And my mom and I, when we do talk on the phone, we talk once a week on the phone, but we mostly just talk about superficial things. And that is tough because I wish I had a mother and a relationship with my mom that was, in which she was more like a friend and I could tell her things that are going on in my life. But unfortunately, that's just not the case. And one of the things that I have actually done that has been very helpful for me, and this is with the guidance of a professional therapist that has really helped me, is I've accepted that this is who my mom is and that I cannot change her and I can't,
Yeah, that is something too that, well, I think a lot of people before they've accepted that can seem really angry. And a situation like this would be more parent bashing than you would want it to be. Or if you were recording, an interview about them, it would be harder. It really takes that acceptance to be positive about these kinds of things.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I used to be in that place and of sort of anger and bitterness. And again, I'm just putting a plug in for therapy, which is very important. Go to therapy if you're listening to this, because it's really helpful. And that's one of the things that has really helped me is, I am in a place now where I can love my mom for who she is, but also recognize that it's not going to ever be that kind of a relationship, and that's okay. So as a result of that, my mom knows very little about my life. She knows the official things, the official narrative. She knows about my degree path, and like the big benchmarks that I'm hitting, and sort of major life events like that. But she does not know about my deconversion journey. She also doesn't know very much about my love life because I do not feel comfortable telling her really anything about my dating life because of her conservative, views on relationships and on sex. So that's where I'm at with my parents. So I am not out to them. I have 2 sisters, and so one of my sisters is also an academic, so she's also doing a PhD at Yale University, so she's very smart. And she deconverted when she was a roughly junior in undergrad, and she's younger. She's 4 years younger than me, so she actually deconverted before me, and so now she and I have a pretty good relationship where I feel like I can talk to her about all of these things because she and I have lead a very similar lifestyle or at a similar sort of headspace and place in life right now. Both of us are finishing our PhDs soon, and both of us want careers, and both of us aren't sure if we want to get married or aren't sure if we want to have kids. And, just sort of we have some sort of similar major life goals. And we're both like on the same page in terms of politics and that kind of thing. So
has she told your parents? Has
she has, but it was a while. It was when she was in undergrad. And I don't know that she's had conversations recently with them about her relationship with God. I just remember a very fraught road trip that I was on with her and my parents, and her other sister was not there. And I cannot actually remember the details. Like I'm not sure why my other sister Jess was not there. But anyway, and my sister was sharing what she had learned, in a class on world religions where she was questioning, the faith. So Right. So that was a while ago.
Yeah. How did you feel when she deconverted?
At the time, that's interesting. Yeah. So at the time, it was definitely stressful for me, but I wasn't as stressed out as my parents because I had also been in college at that point. So I was used to all the things she was saying were things that I'd heard before. And I think just like I had been around enough people at that point that were not Christians that it wasn't super shocking. I was just more impressed at her boldness at bringing it up in front of my parents, which I would never do.
Yeah. Your sister is very bold, so I can understand that. That's her personality.
Yes, this sister of mine has a very, very strong personality. So that's my situation with her. And then my other sister, my I'm the oldest of 3 daughters. So my middle sister, she is interesting. So she's still a Christian, and she is, living has a more conservative worldview, I would say, although not extremely conservative, but certainly more so than my other sister and I. And she's married, and she and I have also come out to her, but she was very sad when I told her. And this particular sister is she's just a very, very caring, very compassionate person, and feels everything very deeply. And she's always been that way. So just a very, like, if you met this particular sister, you would think she was very warm. And again, just very, very kind. And so she was really sad when I told her, but not judgmental by any means, just sad, because she cares about me. So I do remember we were talking on the phone because she and I didn't live in the same state at that time, and we still don't. And I remember that she cried on the phone, so it was sad. And then since then, we haven't really had very many specific conversations about it. But we got it out there, and she's aware of the situation. So that is the situation in terms of who my immediate family members are, what they're like, and what my coming out or lack of coming out, how that worked with them. And the next thing that I want to talk about is how my family affected my deconversion. What was there something in them that influenced my deconversion? And
yeah, right, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, and so the answer to that is yes, in a couple of different ways. So my parents modeled the Christian marriage, and I saw the sort of the negative side to this model. So I'll be more specific. My parents met at a Christian college in Oklahoma, and they were part of the same youth group, college ministry group. And they got married within less than a year of dating each other. So they didn't know each other very long. And they also, my mom always likes to brag about how she and my father courted and instead of dating. And so my mom defines court as hanging out with somebody only in bigger groups of people, in social settings. Because and the idea behind this is so that you're not ever tempted to do anything sexual with the person.
Right. Yeah. And I do think that situations where people have known each other for a year could actually, I think people who've been married or who've been known each other for a year have gotten married and have had good relationships. But that courting element, I think, brings a different knowledge of each other to the table.
Right, exactly, right. Because this is a situation where they only knew each other for a year, but also only in public spaces. So it's obviously it's difficult. It's just very difficult to really see what somebody is like if that's your only interaction with them. And so from my perspective, based on what I've witnessed in my parents' relationship over the years, is that they just really didn't know each other very well and didn't know themselves very well when they got married. And they followed that traditional path. So they got married. They were both virgins when they got married. And then my mom moved from Oklahoma to somewhere in the state of New York with my dad. So a very different climate, very long distance. My mom's entire family lives in Oklahoma, so she left, and she's very close with her siblings. So she left all of that. And they both had college degrees, but my mom, didn't really pursue a career specifically. And my dad didn't really in the beginning either. It took him a while to figure out his career path. And so they didn't have a lot of money, and they just did the thing that Christian parents do, which is that they had kids. And so, and they were very, proud of that. And from an outsider's perspective, this seemed like a very good, again, sort of positive model of a relationship. But I saw the darker side to that, which is that I grew up with just parents who I never had a model of two people who had a partnership where they really liked each other's company and they were compatible and really respected each other and liked spending time with each other. I didn't really see any of that modeled. I saw two people who were mostly strangers, who were engaging in a traditional division of labor in terms of, the household work and child rearing. And, my parents don't, and they still don't really, I don't witness them talking about much to each other. Like they don't have conversations. They don't have a lot of activities that they like to do together. They have a couple, but not very many. Again, there's just a lot of things that I think it does not, from my perspective, feel like or seem like an equal, compatible partnership. And they actually separated for a little while. So there were, problems that sort of exploded briefly because neither of them were very good at communicating. And I don't think just had ever learned how to do that. And they did get back together. They are still together. But again, I see the way that these problems are still present, even though they're back together. So that was one thing that certainly contributed to my deconversion, because I said, wait a minute, if this is a life path that that is acceptable in Christianity. I mean, and Christine will comment on this in a minute when she talks. Other people in our church really thought my parents and our family was like a model Christian family, which is really ironic to me. But that's part of the problem, right? From my perspective, is that, if this is held up as a model relationship, it certainly was a factor that caused me to lose faith in Christianity and Christian teachings. Because I said, well, if this Christian teaching isn't, if it's just a facade, and there's this darker internal, interior behind the gildedness, then what else? What else about Christianity and about Christian teachings are sort of artificial like this? And then another factor that contributed to my deconversion was also that we were very poor, especially when I was younger. And my parents, because of their Christianity, and especially my mom, they were very proud of our poverty. It was a source of pride because they had this idea that, God, they're trusting in God, and, God is going to provide for them. And, we don't need material possessions anyway, and that kind of thing. And there's some validity to some of that. Like, for example, I do think it's a good thing that we did not grow up with a lot of, we didn't watch a lot of TV, we didn't play video games, because we couldn't afford them, and my parents were sort of against that kind of materialism. And that actually ended up being really great, I think, because we were always outside playing, my sisters and I, and that's, as we know now, if you read any kind of child rearing book, they'll tell you that that's really good for kids. So that there were positive things, but there were also a lot of negative things associated with this pride of poverty, because I found the poverty really, really, really anxiety inducing at so many different levels. And I was depressed because of it. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. But as an adult looking back, I recognized that I was really anxious and depressed. And there was sort of no space for me to express that, and not really any emotional support for any of that stress because of my parents' attitude. And, one example is that I think of a lot is that we always shopped at the Salvation Army. That's the only clothes shopping we did, ever.
When there was no Walmart.
No, even when there was, there wasn't a Walmart initially, but even when there was a Walmart, we didn't go to Walmart. we went to Salvation Army. And there was a time, I remember the very first time I ever had to buy a bra when I was, 11 or 12. We went to the Salvation Army and bought a used bra, in the middle of this noisy store. And it was awful. I mean, it was really stressful, and it kind of makes me sick to my stomach thinking about it. And the thing that made it awful was not that in and of itself. I mean, that was part of it, but it was that my mom was really unsympathetic to sort of my expression of sadness or emotional stress. And she was just very no, you should be proud of this. You shouldn't care about this. And we're just going to, do it. And so that was her attitude about a lot of different things. And this goes to a larger problem, which is that I did not receive a lot of, in general, a lot of emotional support. And again, that's something that, as a result of therapy, I've recognized has had a huge impact on me, because my therapist has called it emotional neglect, which I think is pretty accurate. And it's had a huge negative impact on me. Fortunately, I've been able to work through a lot of that, but I have spent a lot of my adult life working through anxiety and depression, and also just in learning how to regulate my emotions and learning how to communicate my emotions in a way that's constructive and not passive aggressive, because I didn't have any of that modeled for me when I was younger. Anyway, and all of that relates to Christianity, the emotional neglect as well, right? Because in Christianity, and certainly my parents' model of it was, you just pray. If you're sad about something, just go pray, and God will take care of it. And this still happens. If I'm sad, if I express something upsetting that's happened to me to my parents, their response is usually, well, we'll pray about it, or go pray about it, instead of sort of having a conversation about the feelings involved. So that really turned me off to Christianity. And just to wrap things up, so essentially when I started to deconvert, one of the key factors in it, in addition to obviously other more intellectual and academic reasons, but another reason was, I said, well, if this is what a Christian family is like, then I don't want that, and I don't want that kind of relationship.
Yeah. So what do you think of a model family now? What's your idea? How has that changed?
So now, in terms of romantic relationships, I want someone who is who feels like a partner to me. And that's the big shift. So I envision someone who, this person and I have both have jobs that we're really passionate about, and we come home and we share household duties, and that I also envision it being with someone who is giving me that emotional support, not emotional codependency, right? But just that kind of, we are actually going to talk about our feelings. And I also envision being with someone who I really connect with and who I really genuinely am compatible with. We have similar interests. We can have conversations about things. That's all really important to me. And in terms of children, I'm not sure that I want kids. And in fact, I'm pretty sure I don't want kids. And that's had I think watching my parents and seeing how I was raised, I think that's had a really big impact on my decision to not necessarily want to have children. Because again, I've seen the negative side to that. But I always say that I'm not 100% against having kids, but certainly it's not something I want anytime soon, and it's not something that I particularly think that I want. So
yeah, and as you grow, your partner surprises you, and your having kids can surprise you. I certainly respect people who don't want to have kids, and I think that they should be allowed to say that without someone saying, oh, you'll change your mind, so. But I do think those are great values to have currently. To value partnership above all in a relationship, I think is very important. My current views on family definitely revolve around that. I actually don't think passionate love is the most important thing. I do think partnership is the most important thing. That ability to compromise and to put the other person first is key, because it's long lasting. And I do think that's something that actually was kind of taught in our church a little bit. But that's sort of I think part of that was to just say that, don't worry about the sexual side of it, because it's really that you both put God first and that you have a partnership, second. But I do think that sex in relationships was underemphasized in our church in a big way. But we can talk about that in another cast.
Yes. We plan on having a whole episode on romantic relationships.
So first, I want to say that similarly to Heather, I was also relatively poor. And I'm saying relatively because many families I knew owned homes. And we didn't own a home. We rented a home, and we were in an apartment for a while. I was in the same room with my brother till I was like 7 or so, or 8. And so I understand that kind of shot to your pride, Heather, that you had when you were younger. But I think as I've grown, I've realized that I kind of appreciate my mom for putting value in some of the things that she did. She didn't have pride in our poverty. She always sort of insisted that we had more than we did, but I appreciate that. I was not always like that. I was very embarrassed of being poor when I was younger, so I understand that. The reason that we were poor, one of the reasons, is because my mom really wanted to be an evangelist. So my mom went to ORU, and so we were submersed. I went to Bible school and all those things. And it wasn't until we moved back to New York that I really started thinking about my faith. And my mom at that point was trying to start her ministry, and my brother was also on the spectrum, and so she was trying to give him love and start her ministry. And so she really didn't have a lot of time for me, so I sort of was independent at that phase. My dad was great, but he was just trying to work to support our family, so he worked a lot. And he actually got injured when I was in high school. He also wasn't very strong Christian, although he has pages and pages where he's like transcribed the Bible in block lettering. And so I think he used that as sort of like devotion time, but he wouldn't talk about God or teach me about God. It wasn't his thing. As a matter of fact, he didn't always go to church, but that wasn't because he didn't want to go to church. It was more about like he was tired from work or wasn't feeling well. And like I said, my parents weren't really involved in my life. My dad isn't really an intellectual. He's more of a day-to-day kind of guy. And so I didn't really talk to them when I deconverted. And I also tried to adopt my friends as my family. I spent a lot of time at one of my friends' house, and she sort of became a sister to me. And when I deconverted, she was actually involved with a fringe group of Christianity that was communal and would have you let go of all your possessions and live with them. And so we were going in two different directions at that time. And so I sort of lost my family for several years. And so after I deconverted, I didn't have the family that I'd created through my friend, and I didn't have my actual family because I distanced myself from them in a big way. And I didn't only distance myself from them because of deconversion. I also just didn't feel like they were a piece of my life. And so it wasn't until much later that I realized that I needed family. And I got back in touch with my mom, and I talked to my dad. But still, even to this day, I talk to my dad once every month or two. And my mom, we sometimes go 6 or 7 months without talking. And so that kind of family isn't immediate in my life. And I've also kind of adopted my boyfriend's family in a way, although that's an entirely different story. When I finally decided to tell my mom that I wasn't a Christian anymore, she completely denied it. She wouldn't allow me to not be a Christian. She thought that like maybe I was just fighting with God, or there was just that I would come back. And she probably still thinks that, I have a relationship with God, or just insists that I have a relationship with God and won't accept that. But it's not that important for me because of the distance that we have. I love her, but I don't need that kind of reassurance in my life right now. I don't worry about telling my dad these things because he's not that kind of person. I don't think he would care. Wouldn't change his life in the least. During that time when I was distancing myself from my family, I didn't spend any holidays with them either because the holidays were kind of traditional, Christmassy, and I didn't want to celebrate like that, It's funny that Heather talked about her family as being a model Christian family because we did, many of the girls in our, and I'm saying girls because that's, our school was primarily made of girls. Heather's family model was the family model that we saw as an ideal of a family group. Not that I thought that that was what I wanted, just that it was something that I looked up to. Now I've actually sort of adopted my family's ideals. My mom and dad were partners, and they weren't really affectionate and loving with each other, and I'm okay. I feel that commitment and partnership is really important. And so I've sort of, even though they're kind of a mess, they live in 2 different states. They're still married though. But I still sort of like the way that they did it, and I appreciate it. And it has little to do with Christianity and more to do with the fact that I understand how you can get through life with a partner. Whereas I don't understand how you can get through life with someone who only shares the same values as you, not necessarily treating you with the respect and kindness that a partner should, If I was doing this, if we were talking about this, 5 years ago, you would hear a lot of anger in my voice. And I think I've just moved forward and accepted that, my mom is a Christian and that's how it's going to be. And she's going to be an avid Christian probably until she dies, I think, because there are some reasonable arguments that we've had that she doesn't think are reasonable. And I'm okay with that. And moving forward, I think that my family, my daughter and my boyfriend are the family that I focus on, even though I want my other immediate family to be a piece of my life, I don't really need them. And I know that's terrible to say, but I'm okay with the distance. And that's how I've been able to move forward in my life.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. We would like to thank our friends from Twitter, Godless Iowan, Mrs. Snarky, and the anonymous woman who provided us with the insightful reflections that you heard at the beginning of this podcast. And we would also like to extend a huge thank you to all of you, our listeners. We are truly grateful for your support. If you would like to contact us, you may email us at forsakingfaith@gmail.com or look us up on Twitter and Facebook at Forsaking Faith. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, and we would also appreciate it if you would leave us a review so that more people can find us. Stay tuned as we wrap up this episode with our artistic segment, which we hope will further inspire you as you reflect on what you've just heard.
We'd like to thank Luke and Tonya Emmerich for sharing their song, Leading Me Home.
I don't know how I feel right now. Maybe life's just catching up with me. I guess I'll make it through somehow, but where will this road lead? I feel resolve stirring deep within my soul, leading me to a truth I need to know. If I go down to the depths of the sea, if I rise up on the morning's wings, surely thick darkness could not hide me from the light of your love, or the strength of your hand leading me home. Everything I'd like to say, you already know, it's no surprise to you. How much you know me grips my soul, it moves me through and through. In my fear I could try to run and hide. Where could I flee where you do not reside? If I go down to the depths of the sea, if I rise up on the morning's wings, surely thick darkness could not hide me from the light of your love, or the strength of your hand leading me home. If I go down to the depths of the sea, if I rise up on the morning's wings, surely thick darkness could not